I'm very happy to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Laura Eirmann. She is actually an AMC alum. She did her internship here. She received her DVM from Cornell in 1993 and then completed her small animal internship here in New York City. After her internship, she returned to Cornell as an instructor in molecular biology and as a clinical instructor in the community practice service of the Companion Animal Hospital. In 1997, she moved home to New Jersey and joined the staff of the Oradell Animal Hospital. She joined Nestlé Purina Company in 1998 and is currently a veterinary communications manager there. She completed a residency in small animal clinical nutrition training and became a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Nutrition in 2010. She currently oversees the clinical nutrition service at the Oradell Animal Hospital, where she does nutrition consultations for veterinarians and for pet owners, and she's come highly recommended from several of our clients. She speaks at regional and national meetings and is the author of several chapters in veterinary textbooks, including Edinger's Textbook of Internal Medicine, Clinical Veterinary Advisor, Vet Clinics of North America, and Nutritional Management of Hospitalized Small Animals. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Laura Eirmann.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's such an honor to be here, and I want to thank all of you for caring so much about your pets that you're here tonight and for bringing some of them along. They are absolutely adorable, and I'll try not to get distracted by all those cute faces. The good thing is I actually get to start with the first question. I just want people to tell me, where do you get your information about pet nutrition? What resources do you currently use? Yeah. Pet store, right, where you buy the food. So they, yeah, certainly have knowledge of what they're carrying in products. Yeah, pet store, anything else? Mm-hmm. Friends, yeah. You see somebody with a gorgeous dog, what do you feed? Yeah. Cats, dogs, right? That's what I focus on. Please don't ask me about horses because that's a subspecialty that I don't know a whole lot about. So just dogs and cats for me. That's a lot. Any place else? Yeah, recommendations, veterinarian, etc. So I lump it and say places where you might purchase food, certainly a great resource. People who help you with your animals, that have experience with animals, dog walkers, groomers, your neighbor. Some of us, hard books, internet, groomer. Now, some of the challenge you've probably experienced, I have as well, is sometimes the information is confusing, conflicting, scary. We'll talk a little bit about that. Food shouldn't be scary. I want you to leave here confident that it's not scary, that it's a lot of just kind of thinking it through. The most important person, my own personal bias, certainly is your veterinarian. There's nobody who knows your pet better than you and your family. You're number one in this decision. I advise when people come to me for a consultation, my job is to come up with a nutrition plan that is right for your animal as well as for you. The next in line who knows your animal better than anybody else is your primary care veterinarian. So do not be quiet about asking for a nutrition recommendation. What should I feed? How much should I feed? What do you think about this diet? I hear veterinarians, for the most part, if I had to characterize us, tend to be kind of a quiet, humble bunch. And sometimes we don't let folks know that we know quite a bit of nutrition. And any veterinarian who says to me, I don't know enough nutrition, I'll say to them, you know physiology, and nutrition is all about physiology. So use them as a resource. I know we get distracted if we come in with an ear infection or something going on in the eye that we may not think about it. Make a separate visit. Make a separate visit to talk nutrition. Now I want to help you a little bit because, as I mentioned, I find the information sometimes conflicting and confusing as well, and I have to read more. So how do you evaluate information, whether you're seeing it online, books from friends, etc.? Well, we have to kind of sort through that, and I'll give you the approach that I utilize. It's actually one of the handouts that is over there. Just how to sort through not just internet information, but general information. What should you be thinking about? And again, for some folks, this might be kind of common knowledge, and for those of us that are less internet savvy like myself, just thinking about the website. Is it a .com? Is it a commercial website? Is it an academic website, EDU, that we would hope would be a little bit more university academic based? Is it a government resource, which may be involved, especially with regulatory issues? And then the timeliness of the website. And sometimes that can be confusing, but if it is dated, check out the date. Nutrition is like any other branch of medicine. We learn things every day. Things that I learned when I graduated in the 90s are no longer true. Case in point, we were taught to take large breed dogs and switch them to an adult diet when they were spayed or neutered. That's because at the time we were trying to slow the rate of growth, which is still correct for a large breed puppy, but we did not have specially formulated diets for large breed puppies that account for the fact that puppies need more calcium and phosphorus compared to adults. So we didn't have that type of diet back in the 90s. So if you're looking at old websites, you might be getting a little bit of outdated information. So check that out. Again, a person who can tell a good story can be very convincing. So sometimes the internet, you just want to ask, who wrote this and what is their background? Are they, have a lot of experience with animals? That's great. Are they a veterinarian, so they have some medical knowledge? Are they a nutritionist? And the challenge in the veterinary world is that the term board certified veterinary nutritionist is very specific. It's like if you see one of the cardiologists here at the Animal Medical Center, they're board certified cardiologists. So those of us that are board certified did our internships, our residencies, we're veterinarians. The term nutritionist is general. So you can call yourself a nutritionist without having that training. So you just want to think about that. Now, I don't want you to leave here thinking you've got to be a board certified veterinarian nutritionist to make a recommendation for a pet. Again, your primary veterinarian knows your pet very well. You're seeing them hopefully at least once a year, if not sooner. In addition, when we're working on a team approach in terms of commercial diets, we're often working with PhD nutritionists who have specialty in dog or cat nutrition. And some of the folks that I work with are very specific. They have studied, for example, fatty acids in the dog, and they would know that omega-3 fatty acids for fish oil might be helpful for joint health, for mobility. So, part of the team of who the expert is. If it's too good to be true, I don't have to say this to a bunch of New Yorkers. I'm a New Yorker at heart too, but sometimes I talk to people and they do just believe everything they read. So I recommend this. I love the term trust but verify. Trust the information, but verify it. Ask questions. Be an equal opportunity skeptic. And if it's too good to be true, it might be. And it really, my heart goes out for that, because I realize when you're scared or when your pet is ill, we all want that miracle, that magical thing. So again, get that information and just ask your veterinarian, what do you think of this? Be careful if it's a story. Again, be careful if it's a scare tactic. Unfortunately, some of the information that I come across that clients bring me for consults is they are afraid to do something because somebody has told them that no to this or this is bad. And again, sometimes you just go back to, I love my parents, what they taught me, kind of everything in moderation. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So just kind of take that approach. Be careful of the rating websites, and you'll read that a little bit more. That the guidelines that I gave you, I should have mentioned, were developed by a global nutrition committee for the World Small Animal Veterinary Association. So it's a group of veterinarians, nutritionists, pet experts who came up with these guidelines. And they reviewed a lot of the website ranking systems, and the disadvantage of the ranking systems is they're rather simplistic. They tend to only look at a tiny part of the pet food label, for example, without looking at the big picture. So more on that later. These are 4 questions that I get most commonly. I'm going to spend most of the time on the first one because a lot of the principles about selecting a commercial pet food are going to apply, whether it's a commercial pet food that you might get at the grocery store or at the pet store. It's also going to apply to similar principles if you opt to cook for your pet, or if you're even evaluating a dietary supplement. So I'll spend the most time on that, but I'm going to hit on the questions of commercial diet, home cooking, raw and grain-free. I'm not trying to convince you or change your mind about anything. I just want to give you resources and a perspective of how I approach cases. So when we go to selecting a pet food, my specialty, the American College of Veterinary Nutrition, we all kind of talk about what we call the circle of nutrition. And the circle of nutrition begins with the individual animal, the dog or the cat. And I'll give you a couple little examples of interesting differences between those two species and why it makes it really fascinating to work with both of them. Equally important, as I mentioned earlier, is our listening skills, our ability to find out what's going on in your home. Again, you are the expert for that pet. When people come to see me and they've had their pet for over 10 years and I've walked in the exam room, that person I'm talking to knows more about their animal day in, day out than I do. I know the medical record. I've reviewed the blood work. I've reviewed what you're feeding. But we're a team. It's a team approach. We start with that, and then we just come up with a nutrition plan, a comprehensive plan. So when we're looking at the animal, you know, the obvious are there are species differences between dogs and cats. I'll hit a couple highlights for you. Of course, we do feed puppies and kittens differently than adults. And there are some interesting breed variabilities just because we all know that certain breeds are predisposed to certain medical conditions, just like certain families may be predisposed to certain conditions. In fact, my next door neighbor has a miniature schnauzer. Miniature schnauzers are often prone to having high fat levels in the blood, a condition called hyperlipidemia. Their triglycerides are high. They're kind of like families where high cholesterol runs in the family. So that particular individual actually needs to be on a low-fat diet. So he needs to be fed a certain type of diet because of his medical condition. That's where some of the veterinary therapeutic diets come in. That's where if your veterinarian is recommending a specific diet, they'll probably explain why that diet requires a prescription. Because for some of those diets, and I'll give you the example of something very common in cats, as cats age, we're taking better and better care of cats, are living longer and longer. And for many cats, their kidneys start to not work as well as they used to do. And we start seeing some changes in their blood work. And we know that changing their diet can help their quality of life and their longevity. And one of the keys of that diet is to lower the amount of phosphorus in the food. So these special diets are actually lower in phosphorus than you would get for a healthy dog or cat. In fact, they're actually too low for a growing kitten because we need phosphorus for bone health. So when people ask, well, why are they special and they need a prescription, it's because we're forcing that nutrient profile to a certain way that we wouldn't just want anybody to mistakenly purchase that, to go, oh, my cat had a bladder stone and bladder, kidney, that's kind of alike, maybe that's the diet I want, and that would not be the correct choice. So that's why there are special diets. So let's look at dogs and cats. So cats, as we all know, are obligate carnivores. So carnivore, everybody says, oh, they eat meat. Well, in reality, the way that I think about it is they eat prey. They catch living things and they eat. And the reason I make the distinction is that by a definition, if you think about how ingredients are listed in pet food, meat equals skeletal muscle, and that's not all the cat eats. So the cat does consume, when they're eating a rodent, bone. They're getting their calcium that way. Organ meat is an excellent source. If your mama told you to eat your liver to get some fat-soluble vitamins and other nutrients, that's a good source of many minerals, iron for the pet. Now, that becomes really tricky when we talk about ingredients because in the pet food world, that's sometimes referred to by this unfriendly term called byproducts. But byproducts are organ meat. They're the parts that we don't prefer to eat. But if you were a dog or cat, you would eat the viscera, you would eat those organs. Dogs are in, if you're into thinking about taxonomy, they are in the order Carnivora, but they are actually omnivores. And there was actually an interesting paper published in Nature 2013 that looked at the genetic differences between the wolf and the domestic dog. And there were kind of two categories where their genetic makeup diverged. One is fascinating. It's all related to behavior and how they're more domesticated and how they co-evolved with us, which is fascinating. And the second is actually how they handle starches and carbohydrates. So those little commercials that say feed them like a wolf, genetically not necessarily need to be the case. They also eat differently, and that's really important to think about if your pet isn't feeling well and isn't eating well. For the most part, there's exceptions to the rule, but cats are solitary hunters and solitary eaters. So in our hospital, sometimes we want to get that cat somewhere quiet, maybe cover the cage, maybe get them away from a barking dog or away from all the hustle bustle in our critical care unit and try to give them some privacy. That's typically how many cats want to eat. Many dogs are social eaters. Many dogs hunt in packs and they're social eaters and they like to eat a lot all at once. They don't necessarily eat 3 meals a day, and that's what I try to reassure a lot of pet owners who come to me and say, I don't think my dog or cat is eating enough. I don't eat the same amount every day. I know my calorie intake varies a bit. I know I was a little nervous having to talk to people, so no, I haven't eaten supper yet because I didn't want my tummy wobbling around. So, I may not eat as much today as I will tomorrow. But I'm still okay, I'm healthy. So if you want something objective, get a pet scale. Amazon has great pet scales. If you want the objective, is you really eating enough? We'll talk about that. Monitor body weight, monitor body condition. Life stage example I already addressed. Well, puppies, just like human babies, are growing. So they need more protein for muscle. They need more calcium and phosphorus for growing bones. So their diets are formulated a little bit differently. And again, this applies whether it's a commercial food or whether you opt to home cook. You need a different nutrient profile for life stage. We already talked about the large breed puppies. If you walk away, message number 1 is rely on your veterinarian. Use your veterinarian as a resource for nutrition information. If you read something that scares you, that doesn't sound right, that you think you're not doing, get in touch with your veterinarian. I think more than anything else, we will often alleviate your fears and we will reassure you that you're doing the right thing, or we will get you to somebody who can help you. That's our job. Second rule isn't so much what you want to feed. If you say to me, what should I feed? I'm going to tell you that in my exam room, more of the answer is going to be about feeding the amount so that your dog or cat stays lean. Because we know, just like in humans, lean animals live longer. So it's not so much what you feed. Yes, that's important. I don't care. I can make it work for you, whether it's commercial, home cooked, whatever variety, as long as it's providing all the nutrients, complete diet, balanced in the right amount. But I want to make sure that you're feeding the amount so that your pet stays nice and lean their whole life. When do we transition? Common question I get, when do you transition to an adult diet? It's really when the bones stop growing. So for a cat, most people will say make things easy, somewhere about a year, 10 months a year is reasonable. Your larger breed dogs are going to stay on their puppy diets longer, often beyond a year. Sometimes the giant breed, 18 to 24 months. And your smaller breeds, typically anywhere, depending on the breed, anywhere from about 8 to 10 months. So it just gives you some guidelines. You matter too. The family matters. And I take everything into consideration. Cost, convenience. You don't have to spend a ton of money for pet food. That's the other thing I try to reassure you of. I know it's kind of not something we often think about because often we think more money must mean better. There's really no data to support that. Feed the food that is right for your dog. And the food that's right for your dog might not be the food that is right for your neighbor's dog. Same with kitty cats. You may have, and I struggle with the multi-cat households because sometimes what's right for one cat in the household is not right for the other cat, and we've got to get as creative as we can. And there's all kinds of technology these days with these automated feeders where they can wear a little collar that will allow the one kitty to get into the food and not anybody else. So we've got all kinds of strategies, all kinds of things, all kinds of things. What's important to you matters to us too, veterinarians. So if there's a certain type of feeding principle that you like to follow, we can work to try to accommodate that. And that could be that perhaps you, well, very good example, I certainly have clients who have children with very severe allergies to certain ingredients, and they just can't have it in their home. So we have to look for a diet, not because the pet has the allergy, but the child does. You know, I've had some clients who are gluten sensitive and they just don't want it in their house because they're washing the bowls, they're touching, and they just don't want to have that risk. So we can work on all of that. There's a lot of good options. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is, well, I'm kind of seeing the package. What can I look for on the package, and can I trust? There's, again, a trust issue. Is food safe? You know, I'm hearing some scary recalls are happening. How can I get that information? Who's looking out? So I'm just going to give you 2 slides on how commercial pet foods are regulated. They're actually regulated at 2 levels. First is the federal level, and that dates back to this Federal Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, which was back in the 1930s, and that applies to animal feed and pet food as well as human foods. So that's been on the books for a very long time. More recently, the more recent food safety laws, like the Food Safety Modernization Act, applies to dog and cat nutrition as it does to human nutrition. And that's actually a very good set of laws because it's made our food safety system a bit more proactive. So part of the reason why we might have a heightened level of awareness is that there's a bit more of a requirement for issues to be reported to the FDA and for the FDA to enact on them. So if you want to get access to that information, we're going to have up on the website in the next couple of days a long resource list of, they're just my personal favorite websites that I send folks to. And some of them include how you can get access to recalls. So if you're nervous about something, you don't know if it's rumor, Facebook rumor, or true or not, there's ways to kind of get to that information. So that's the FDA. We're also regulated on the state level. Now there's 50 states. So we want to try to have a little bit of commonality. The person at each state that's the higher up authority is your state feed control official. So every state has one. In my state, it's actually our state chemist in the state of New Jersey. So this person is responsible for commercial pet food sold within the state. And to give a little bit of continuity from state to state, because perhaps you are going to make a pet food in New York and you want to sell it in New Jersey and Connecticut because they're nearby, it would be nice if the laws were somewhat common. So there is actually a model set of rules and regulations that are set forth. And I just want to bring this up because you may hear this term AAFCO, Association of Animal Feed Control Officials. And people get a little bit confused by what this is and what do they do or don't they do. Well, they're actually composed of a group of federal and state regulators. And their job is to just develop among other things, a model regulation for pet food that each state can enact as part of their feed law or not. And many states do. So it kind of gives, again, a little bit of continuity. This is what they're not, because this is where you'll come across some things that are a little bit confusing. They are not a regulatory body. They are not enforcers. So AAFCO doesn't certify any pet foods. They don't, give them the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. The laws are enacted at the state and the federal level by those officials. Company industry employees cannot be voting members of AAFCO, because that's the other thing you come across. Well, it's all just this, big brother and group of good old boys that come up with these things to favor the pet food industry. That's not the trade organization. The trade organization for pet food manufacturers is separate. That's not AAFCO. So for the states, and again, there are most of them that follow AAFCO, there are some very specific guidelines on what can and cannot be on a pet food label. And that's what you see when you go to the pet store. So I wanted to touch on the red and the blue things to highlight just a couple of things. So any pet food that by definition is complete and balanced, and that's the other term you'll hear me say over and over. So I like to explain pet food, again, whether it's home cooking in your kitchen or you're buying pet food, as our goal. The goal for what veterinary nutritionists and most veterinarians recommend is really feeding our dogs and cats the same way you would feed an infant. So if you think about what an infant eats breast milk or baby formula. And if that infant consumes enough to meet their energy or calorie needs, that formula or milk has all of the essential nutrients that individual needs, right? The protein, the essential fatty acids, the calcium, the vitamins. That's what we do with complete and balanced pet foods. Complete, the 30+ nutrients the dog and cat need, balanced in the correct ratios. So whether you're buying a commercial diet or you're making it in your kitchen, we have the same goal, complete and balanced nutrition. How do you know if a pet food is complete and balanced? It has to have this nutritional adequacy statement. So you can find it on the bag. As a veterinary nutritionist, when you look at, there's a handout I have up there on how to select a pet food. That is one of the recommendations that the Global Nutrition Committee makes. Look for that statement, whether or not the food is complete and balanced. It is not on the front. You know, the front is your sales and your marketing, capture your attention as you're walking down the pet food aisle. It's somewhere on the back or it's on the side. And it's going to say, like in this example, complete and balanced for adult dogs, not a puppy formulation. So you don't want to feed it to your large breed puppy, but complete and balanced for an adult. And this one's been established by feeding it to a group of animals. So there are, again, guidelines to make the criteria of what that entails. I will be the first to tell you it is a point of entry in my mind. It is better than nothing, but it is not, we have fed this food for 10 years, but it does capture some elements of a pet food that you would miss if a pet food company decides to formulate. So what's formulate? So formulate means that a nutritionist knows what the requirements are for an adult cat, for example, and they know what ingredients they're going to use in that product. And this is what I do if I'm helping you formulate a homemade diet. I'm going, okay, I can reach into the database and look at the nutrient profile for chicken breast, if that's what you'd like to feed, and I can look at the nutrient profile for sweet potato. And if I put in so much of this and so much of that, I'll know if that nutrient profile meets the needs for that adult cat. And I'll know how to tweak that. So then that's exactly what happens whether it's home cooked or not. So we can do that. Some manufacturers, and this is a really good idea, after they do that recipe, they'll send out some batches for analysis, make sure that the cooking process hasn't tweaked anything around a little bit. Again, you know, it's a complex, it's a big responsibility. You're ensuring that that food will provide all ingredients in the right amount. So it's not just really a nutritionist formulating the diet as part of the team. You also want to have a food scientist. You want to have ingredient experts. You want to have folks that know that if I cook at this temperature, this is what's going to happen to the B vitamins, so that if I have to put a little bit more in at the end product, I have enough. So there's a bit of a science to it. So if you want to home cook for your pet, that becomes you. So that becomes your responsibility. All that I can do, because I'm not going to prepare it in your kitchen, is give you the balanced recipe. You're the one that's going to have to get the oven temperature right and measure everything out, weigh it all out. But that, in the end, we do the same thing. Now, if you think about it, feeding it to animals, and this is the nice thing about nutrition, they get to eat for a living. So pet food companies sometimes will do home trials, or they'll have some pets at a facility, but these are non-invasive type things. We're really asking the animals, do you like the taste of the food? Can you digest the food? So I saw a pet at the hospital yesterday who's having some gastrointestinal issues, and they were trying a homemade recipe of sweet potato and tilapia, and they said to me they were seeing pieces of fish in the stool. Well, we know that animal's not absorbing it, that that's not going to be the right choice for them. So that's a digestibility type trial. And then bioavailability means that the person that puts together that recipe has the nutrition background to understand that certain forms of certain nutrients are available or not available to the animal. So for example, there's something called copper oxide, sometimes used for coloring in pet food because it's natural, it's copper, but it's not available to the animal for copper that we need to make red blood cells and to do the other things that copper does. So again, somebody that doesn't have that training, that expertise, that's why one of your questions to a pet food manufacturer is, who formulates your diets? What is their level of training? We get to ingredients, because lots of folks are interested in ingredients, and certainly that is the marketing side of the pet food industry is all about the ingredients. And what I want to tell you about ingredients is that the name on the bag, just reading chicken or just reading sweet potato, doesn't really tell you anything about the quality. That has to happen up front. That has to happen up front where somebody has looked at that chicken and made sure it's not spoiled, made sure that it's properly cooked, etc. So I try to steer people away from the concept of only focusing on the ingredient list. Yes, ingredients are important, but what's really important is, and again, pet food manufacturers are becoming more transparent about this. And it's certainly your prerogative to go to their websites and ask them, well, what are you doing when that you're getting that food from some supplier? Do you audit them? Do you periodically take samples of that ingredient, that fish, and test for mercury levels? Do you check your cooking equipment and make sure that it's holding the correct temperature? How about storage? There's always an expiration date. There should be an expiration date. So how do you test that? Do you put that at a high temperature that might mimic sitting in a truck in 90-degree weather for a couple of days as it's getting to your pet store? So those are the types of things that you're not going to see on the label that are equally important. So I like to get people to think a little bit about beyond the label, a little bit beyond an ingredient list. But the ingredients are critical because they provide nutrients, and animals need nutrients. So they're a delivery mechanism. And I kind of lump it this way to show people that, you know, each of these may serve a purpose in a recipe. Again, whether it's a recipe that you're purchasing at a pet store or a recipe that you're making in your kitchen. These are all fats, but these fats differ. Vegetable oils, dogs and cats have a requirement for certain essential fatty acids. One is called linoleic. If my French Schnauzer needs to meet his essential fatty acid requirement for linoleic, but his overall diet needs to be low in fat, and I'm making a recipe for him, whether I'm going to sell it at a pet store or I'm going to have her make it in the kitchen, I am going to choose a vegetable oil or a protein source that's high in linoleic. I'm going to use corn oil because it's the richest source of linoleic, or I'm going to use poultry. I am not going to rely on beef and olive oil to deliver linoleic acid because neither of those ingredients have very much of it. So that's the game we play when we're trying to balance our recipe and make it complete and balanced. Every ingredient is here for a purpose. Some of these things get called fillers. I know you live in Manhattan, so I know you like to pick up little tiny fern poops, but some animals' GI tract needs a little bit of fiber in it. So sometimes we have to use this in the recipe. We have to use a bit of bran or a bit of another cellulose, another fiber source. Let me cover some terms that are defined just so you understand what they are, because this kind of gets confusing. There is a definition for natural. So natural essentially is meaning there's not going to be any artificial colors or preservatives. So all of the ingredients have to come from plant, animal, or mine sources. Now, what you'll often find on the label is that it'll often say natural, fluffy dog food with added vitamins and minerals. And the reason for that is it's rather difficult to meet vitamin and mineral requirements without supplementing. Dogs are different than cats, and cats are different than people. Both species need a lot more calcium than we do, and they need quite a bit less vitamin D than we do. So you can't just kind of take a Centrum and throw it in with chicken and rice and kind of say, okay, I'm done, I'm good to go. It's a little bit more complicated than that. A lot of people ask me, I don't want to add vitamins, I just want to use natural. And we have some concerns, like variability is a big thing to think about. Kelp, nice source of iodine, but variable. So the kelp that you buy this week and the kelp that you buy 3 months from now may not have the same iodine level. One thing that we know for overactive thyroid glands in cats is we probably don't want to be bouncing the iodine intake all over the place. So having a source of iodine like calcium iodinate allows you to control it. It allows your recipe to be more precise. So that's our rationale. Organic is different than natural, and those of you who eat organic yourselves probably understand this. Again, AFCO gives a definition of a feed or an ingredient within a food of being organic, simply meaning it has to abide by the same regulations that human foods do, which are under the jurisdiction of the USDA Natural Organic Program. And organic is less about the ingredient per se and more about the process. So here are a couple of highlights of what an organic food would be. Challenging to do this in commercial pet food because some of the essential nutrients that dogs and cats need, people don't need. Great example in cats is taurine, an essential amino acid. what is organic taurine? So it's hard to get the 100% everything in this bag is organic. There are other terms that really are utilized for a marketing purpose. It's, you know, the holistic diet. You have to ask the company, what do you mean by that? The ancestral diet, that's what they ate in the wild type of concept. And it's interesting because when I was in school, it was premium diets. When I graduated, it was super premium. Now it's become ultra premium, and I guess it'll be super duper premium next. So they're all kind of marketing terms. Don't mean a ton. Here's your resource. It's up there of what to look for in a pet food. And again, we hit on a lot of it. Who formulates the diet? Does the company hire and employ food scientists, PhD dog and cat nutritionists, veterinary nutritionists? You don't have to market a food, but the more expertise, if you want my opinion, the better. A little bit of a personal bias because I'm a big believer that I'm a better veterinarian today than I was when I walked in this room the very first time for intern orientation in June of '93, because I was new and I didn't have a lot of experience. And I learned from all these great veterinarians at the Animal Medical Center, and I've learned from all of my patients in the past 25 years. I think the same comes to pet food companies. Companies that have been doing it for a long time learn and grow and help us all learn about research. So again, that's a personal bias. I don't like to influence people, but I look for companies that have been in the business for a while, that have expertise and that are doing a bit working with the universities to help them learn more about dog and cat nutrition, because we got a lot more to learn. So this kind of hits on those highlights. Who formulates? Where do you make your food? Now, some companies may just be marketing companies. And you'll know that when you read the label, because it will say distributed by company X. That means they probably are not probably not. They're not manufacturing it themselves typically. They're contracting that out to somebody else. So then that raises the question of level of control. They have to trust who's making the food for them. So little clues that you can get on that. Your vet. So one thing that we have as veterinarians is we see a lot of animals, a lot of dogs and cats every single day. And we get our own personal experience of things like, wow, you know, these are commonly fed foods, and most dogs that I see on this diet look great. Their coats are shiny, no complaints about stool. Others, we all just kind of know. We're like, God, I don't know, most of the dogs that eat this kind of come in with soft stool, and people complain, and I change their diet and it gets better, and I get these referred to me sometimes, but then somebody in the pet store or somebody else, neighbor, influences them to go back to something else, and the poop gets soft, and the exam room, I say to folks, listen to your dog, listen to your cat, they will tell you what diet's working best for them, so rely on them. We get exposed, of course. Companies know that we make recommendations, so companies meet with us and we go to meetings and they're there, so we know what's going on. I'd be remiss, I've got to do this. Remember again, it's not what you feed, but it's how much you feed, and the goal is to feed to a lean body condition, and that's hard to see when they're actually doing the 2018 study right now, but this is last year's data, when more than half of dogs are overweight or obese in the US, and almost 2/3 of cats are. So how do you know if your animal's lean? You should feel their ribs, and a company came up with this cool tool that I'm going to pass around, and you can look at it, but this is supposed to give you an idea of what the ribs should feel like, and the middle here is perfect, so you can feel them without pushing. I really can't feel them. I had my mom do this, and she said, are there ribs in here? And then she knew right away that was too bony. So play with that. It's kind of fun. How much should I feed? There are charts that'll give you an idea. This is a kitty chart. Now, you're always trying to estimate on lean body weight, because for an overweight animal, that extra body fat doesn't need a lot of calories. So if the cat should be closer, just a ballpark, cat closer to about 4.5 kgs, about 10 pounds. Average cat, about 270 calories. Just gives you a ballpark idea, and then the label will tell you how many calories per cup. If you ever change diets and your cat is a good good body condition, measure out how much they're eating so you know how many calories, because there's a really wide range of how many calories per cup in different foods, and that surprises people. There are some pet foods that are below 300 calories per cup. There are other pet foods that are 600 or above. So if you don't realize that you moved from 300 to 600 and you're still feeding a cup a day, you just double their calories. And then you go, I don't know what happened. I'm still feeding them the same amount. Same amount by volume, but not same amount by calorie. So we think in calories. Home cooking, a lot of the principles are the same. I still want it to be complete and balanced. Why do people want to cook? A lot of good reasons and a lot of legitimate reasons. And again, I tell people, done properly, it's no better or no worse than a commercial diet. It does take a lot of work and a lot of dedication. I did not personally cook for my Golden. I had a 16-year-old Golden, and I didn't personally cook for him. But I respect that some people like to do that for lots of reasons. They do want to look at those ingredients and feel them themselves. Some animals have gotten used to people food. These are the hardest referrals for me, because when I balance it out for them and I add the vitamins and minerals that are usually lacking, if you've ever bitten into a multivitamin, not the best tasting thing in the world. So unfortunately, I have some folks that start home cooking and realize that the properly formulated diet isn't quite as palatable as the chicken McNugget type diet that doesn't have vitamins and minerals in it, so it's a little bit hard. These are the ones that I love to do. These are ones where older animals that have multiple diseases, and that's really the best option for them. Perhaps they need a low-fat diet, but they also have kidney issues. There are limited choices in the commercial realm to do that, so we cook for that. And food is love, we all know that. So especially if our patients aren't well and you're a nurturing, good kind of soul, you just might enjoy doing it. So you just want to be careful, because you can make mistakes. And the most critical time, of course, is when animals are growing. So we want to be cognizant and careful of that. So my advice is to, if you see a recipe, because the challenge is there are recipes you can find on the internet, but anybody could have written them. I mean, my nephew could have written one and posted it and said this is what he fed his dog, and he's a business analyst, so he'd be about as good at doing that as I would be doing his job. But protein sources, that's never lacking. Dogs and cats don't require carbohydrate, but again, sometimes we want carbohydrate because we want it to deliver certain nutrients, or we want to be able to keep the fat or the protein a little bit lower. This essential fatty acid thing, like I said, you need to know a little bit of nutrition to know that nuance about linoleic acid and the corn oil type of thing. Vitamin mineral is often what's lacking, because most of the recipes folks are doing things like chicken and rice or potato and beef or pasta, and we're falling short on calcium, because dogs need more calcium and cats need more calcium. We're often falling low on iron, zinc, things like that. And of course, cats have to have taurine. That's got to be added to the diet. So it takes a lot of attention to detail. First order of business, buy a kitchen scale. Think about it. If I chop up chicken breast and you chop up chicken breast, we may not have the same amount, because maybe you chop smaller than I do and you're fitting more. You got to do it by weight. A great resource if you are interested in doing this. And by the way, these are all going to be on that resource link that's going to go up on the website, so you can click on it. You can work directly with a nutritionist, but 2 nutritionists have websites where they let you generate recipes. And if your pet is healthy, start there. Let your vet know you're doing it. I get a lot of questions about raw. I respect everybody's opinion. I give people mine. These are a lot of the benefits. Palatable is interesting, because I get referrals where people say, well, he didn't really like the raw diet. I heard it was good. He wouldn't eat it. What should I do? And I say, well, feed him cooked food then. We can address that. What do we worry about? Well, the first one, to be honest, there are commercial raw diets that are complete and balanced. Look for the AFCO nutrient statement. It'll be on that. So I'm less worried about that. I'm very worried about people who are doing it on their own, because very few veterinary nutritionists, including myself, want to take the liability of formulating raw diets. So there's only a couple of folks in my discipline that are working with pet owners to do that. And part of that is This is one thing I learned at AMC. We do live in a litigious society at times, and I'm really worried about zoonotic potential and risk to the pet. So I have patients, clients who are undergoing chemotherapy and things like that where it might not be the safest option. So I have friends that feed their own pets raw. I don't judge. I just, say for myself, I don't help people with a formulation for that, but I'll get you to these resources so you can get the help that you need. Because, we have to face it, not as many people feed raw, so it's a lower percentage of feeding, and there is a higher risk of potential contamination. Does every animal that eat raw diet drop dead of salmonella? Of course not. They don't. But the risk is a little bit higher if you do that. Yes, dry foods can get contaminated also because they put a flavoring on them after. But when they look at the studies and you look at what I call the denominator, percentage of that food sold versus risk, there's no doubt that if you're worried about potential contamination, you just need to be aware. And if you're going to do it, the resource list gives you good handling properties. So just good food safety. Now, I want to end with a little discussion on grain-free because there is an issue that we're aware of with a certain type of food. Grain-free has become very popular. It's one of the biggest, fastest growing categories in the commercial pet food industry. And people aren't really sure why. We speculate that it's different, it's new, people are looking for, what's exotic, what's different, so there's some appeal to that. How do I differentiate myself from the other pet foods that are, basically using certain ingredients? So grain became popular. And we all thought that was pretty okay. There wasn't much of an issue. But unfortunately, and this is one of the websites that I have for you from Tufts, cardiologists were starting to see some problems. They were starting to see some dogs developing a condition called dilated cardiomyopathy and enlarged heart. In breeds that we didn't really expect that. And some of the common denominator were the types of foods that they were eating. So one of the potentials, and this is under investigation, so I don't want to scare anybody. I just want to raise awareness that in July, the FDA sent out an alert to veterinarians and just said, be on the lookout. We're alerting pet owners and veterinarians that we're seeing an uptick in the number of these cases, and that there's a bit of a common denominator in that a lot of these animals are eating diets that contain a high proportion of certain legumes, a lot of lentil. Lentil and kangaroo was a common combination that was getting reported to the FDA. So there were just certain things to be aware of. Again, every dog that eats these diets get a problem? Absolutely not. But it's enough to just be aware. If you're concerned, the recommendation that most veterinarians will ask you is, do you feel your pet needs to be on this type of diet? And if the answer is yes, they will help you. We could, for example, measure taurine levels and look for things. If you say, no, I just did it because, it looked interesting, but I'm open to, trying another type of diet, then ask your veterinarian. So again, it's awareness. Just know it's happening. People are looking at it. That's what a lot of veterinary cardiologists and nutritionists are thinking about right now. So I want to make sure we have time for questions, and I really want to leave you with a couple of key points again, that how much you feed, because we're not all going to agree in this room. I can guarantee that I probably have people sitting in here that cook for their pets. That is fine. That feed raw, that is fine. That feed grain-free, that's fine. I respect that. I feed what I feed, and that's fine too. What the commonality is, feed to a lean body condition. That's going to mean more for longevity and help with a lot of the diseases we worry about with aging, including osteoarthritis, diabetes in cats, things like that. You know your pet better than anybody else. That's why I never try to change somebody's mind when they say, I feed this and I want to continue to feed it. That's, you know your pet better than I do. Your primary care veterinarian knows your pet better than I do too. So if you get referred to any specialist, for whether it be a nutritionist or cardiologist, they're part of your team. They're just trying to help your primary veterinarian. So your primary veterinarian has their history. Your primary veterinarian does a lot more than I do of well pet visits. So again, they're seeing those animals that are just coming in for routine health care, and they're asking, hopefully, what are you feeding? And they're looking at the dogs and they're seeing what's working well. So ask their opinion. And there are a lot of resources, as I said, and we'll have posted for you a couple of the really common resources that I use. And with that, be happy to answer any questions. So I see
All right,
there's
so
two.
I'm going to come around with the microphone. Please just wait until I come over so that you can speak into the mic. I'm going to start right here.
Hi, what is your point of view about fresh vegetables and fruit?
Uh-huh.
Our dog loves romaine lettuce,
That's great.
cucumber.
No, I call that a great hybrid way to do home cooking commercial. There, just remember, and ASPCA poison control, you have the nose. We all know nothing in the garlic and onion family, no scallions, chives, things like that. And then, of course, no raisins or grapes. But that's phenomenal. In fact, one of my colleagues' cat loves lettuce. And he's, oh my God, they're carnivores. No, it's a great way to supplement. I mean, we certainly know that we're supposed to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, and especially if you do want to give some foods that you feel are less processed or natural, absolutely. They tend to be low in calories, so it's a great strategy for weight loss. A lot of folks with overweight dogs will add some green beans to the diet to help fill them up. Cats, believe it or not, there's a veterinary nutritionist, we tease her. She finds a lot of cats like microwave squash, and she'll use that as her kind of healthy, way to deliver some nutrients. So yeah, great idea. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my 17-year-old cat was just recently diagnosed with IBD,
Mm-hmm.
and I have her on a gastrointestinal high-energy diet.
Mm-hmm. So she's probably on the thin side, right? And that's why they might have selected. That tends to be a little bit more of a higher calorie diet.
Okay, and another vet recommended I took her for a second opinion,
Mm-hmm.
skin and food sensitivity diet. So I'm sort of crazy. I don't know which to give
So
her.
you're confused. And I would tell you the hardest referrals, and some of you may know Dr. Palmer, are the referrals I get from Dr. Palmer because he has got a hard job.
He's my dog.
He's phenomenal. He's brilliant. The gastrointestinal tract is a little bit of the nutritional black box in that, unfortunately, there's no blood test, no ultrasound that can answer what the right dietary approach is. So I hate to say it, for GI, chronic diarrhea, issues like that, it's a series of dietary food trials. So unfortunately, even if you're thinking it might be a food sensitivity, the blood tests and saliva tests are not helpful. They're very misleading. So I hate to say it, but we almost have to start with one approach. Usually for most cats and dogs as well, if they've been on the diet for about 2 to 4 weeks and they've not improved, we need to try something else. So usually what we try to do is see, with those cases, can we make diet work? So really it's a methodical process of dietary food trials. And I start with just where you're starting, a simple, highly digestible, if your cat has lost weight, caloric dense, GI type diet. So that's an example of one of them. If that doesn't make a difference, where they're moving you to are thinking about food sensitivities. So there's this approach where they do a novel set of ingredients that your cat hasn't eaten before, or there's the more complicated one that's called hydrolyzed, which is kind of what some people with inflammatory bowel disease will have hydrolyzed type diet. So there's that kind of approach.
She was on SO.
Okay, so she had some stone issues. So SO, if you have bladder stones,
I
yep.
was trying to mix it in, just to wean her off.
Well, the nice thing about some of the diets, and I just have to check my notes, is more and more companies are, knowing that so many cats get bladder stones, are taking some of their diets for other medical conditions and making sure that they're still appropriate for stone. Go back to my neighbor Schnauzer that needs a the low-fat diet. I actually suggested that he go on one of the canned therapeutic low-fat diets that's been tested for stone prevention. So you might be able to cover both, and you can monitor. Yeah, good. Anyone else?
I had a question. Does it make more I guess with cats, is it okay to put them on a grain-free diet versus dogs?
Well, that's a fantastic question because we're seeing this issue in dogs mostly, without a doubt, mostly with dogs. Cats, we always knew. The interesting thing that I didn't get into with this condition in dogs is many of them have low taurine. And part of the interesting, nerdy thing to think about it is the ingredients, the lentils and things like this are pretty low in methionine, which is a building block for taurine in dogs. So that's one of the theories of what's going on. Cats already require taurine. It's already in their diet. We're not seeing as much of it, so it might be okay. And if your cat is doing well on it, I would be less concerned. If it's, again, go back to the principles. If it's a complete and balanced diet, it's working for your cat. I'm not trying to talk people who come in, with their cats on those type of diets off of them. Dogs, it's a case-by-case discussion. Like I said, I have some patients that because of food sensitivity issues are on those kind of diets. We're just trying to, if you read the Tufts, try to get them on the products that have been around for a while. And maybe go to things that are a little bit more, we'd have a little bit more knowledge of the ingredients. You hate to say it, but we haven't really been feeding dogs lentils and kangaroo for very long, so we don't quite know as much about that combo and what that might be doing. Okay.
So I just want to jump in with a question from
Sure.
someone from social media who asked, do you have any information on probiotics for animals?
Sure, I do. So probiotics are beneficial bacteria. So if we think about our GI tract, we have a lot of bacteria in our GI tract. And several of us in the room may take probiotics. Activia yogurt, or we may take a product called VSL3. So we take these beneficial bacteria. And there is some research in dogs and cats. It's still a growing area of research of which probiotic fits where. So my guidelines are very similar to pet food. Question one with probiotic is what testing has been done? The first thing you want to ask is has the company in some way ensured that bacteria will be live when fed? And there's different ways to do that. Some will require refrigeration. Some will be encapsulated in a certain way. So you want to ask the company. There's actually a study that was published by a microbiologist, veterinary microbiologist in Canada a few years back. He actually took some products off the shelf and grew them to see which ones were live or not. So you want to ask the company, what have you done to ensure it's live? What have you done to show it helps my animal with this particular condition? So most of what we know right now is gastrointestinal health. So we have some evidence for certain probiotics with acute diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, a little bit with inflammatory bowel. But it's, again, just like the food trials, it's a little bit of matching the right probiotic to the right animal. But point of entry to analyze the probiotic is they should always guarantee the number of live organism on the label, and they should always have an expiration date because they don't live forever. So one call out is if there's no expiration date, I don't know that I would trust it. And then if I'm giving it for immune support or GI health, I would look at the company's literature and see if they've done any type of study to show that. Again, look for those, my training is science-based, so I'm looking for those studies where they took, the sugar pill as well as the probiotic, the placebo, and showed a difference. Everything else is kind of like, well, maybe it would get better on its own, because sometimes animals take antibiotics and it gets better on their own, so you look for those kind of studies.
I'll try to ask two quick rapid-fire related questions. We have a 2-year-old spaniel dachshund mix, and we're feeding her the remnants of the food that we had for our 14-year-old poodle, miniature poodle, who passed away in July. And we're sort of from kidney stuff, so that rings a bell. But the remnants of what we have left over are grain-free, which you've talked about a lot, so thank you. And not raw, but freeze-dried raw, like Stella and Chewy's. And then some wet food. So the thing that I'm wondering is, do you see freeze-dried raw the same as raw? And then we wonder a lot about when, how much kibble versus how much wet food. Our other dogs are mostly kibble their whole lives. Wet food was like a McDonald's treat, but maybe we should have done more. Like, can you speak to either of those two
I'll
things?
kind of address both. So one great question is form, dry dry kibble versus canned food versus, there's the refrigerated type of cooked foods. Fresh Pet is an example of one company that, kind of makes those like log-shaped foods. That's differences of moisture content. What we do know is that feeding dry food versus canned food for dogs or cats doesn't seem to make a difference of whether or not an animal develops kidney disease. So I never want people to think, oh my God, my cat or my dog got kidney disease because I fed them kibble. Absolutely not. My 16-year-old ate kibble his whole life. His kidneys were fine. But when they get kidney disease and they start to have trouble maintaining hydration, canned food is a nice strategy to increase moisture intake. So I recommend canned food for certain indications. Animals that have a history of bladder or kidney stones, because we can't ask them to drink lots of water like your urologist or nephrologist would do if you had a stone. So that's a form preference, and I would say to you, I think dry versus canned is fine. There's conveniences to both. There are, people who worry about everything. So I get people that worry about the liners of the cans that come to see me. I have the people that worry about the extrusion process of the dry. And the thing is, they both work. You had a dog that sounds like lived to a nice, good age. I did as well. We did the right thing. Freeze drying is not considered a kill step as cooking might be. So just be aware that, and I usually think about this because, as mentioned earlier, I did some molecular work before, and I worked in a lab, and the way that we preserve things was to put them in the -80 freezer, bacteria and cells. So freezing kind of slows things down, animates it, but it doesn't necessarily kill it. Check with the company. I mean, again, if every dog that ate that food died, the company would go out of business. But look at the site that I have that lists recall. They do it by year, and I say to folks, just glance if you're worried about. Now, recalls aren't necessarily bad. It means people are doing their homework, right? It means it's getting caught. However, again, there will be a little bit more risk of a freeze-dried than something that goes through a kill step. But if it worked for your other dog, I don't worry about it. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I should define a kill step. It's kind of a term in whether you're home cooking or you're a manufacturer, you're doing something to kill microorganisms. So when I take, chicken breast and make parm for my husband this weekend, I'm going to cook that chicken because the label is going to say cook it to a certain degree, and that's because we know that the chicken is most likely contaminated, right? And we're going to make sure we use a certain cutting board. So I tell people if you're going to feed that type of thing, same thing. Dedicated cutting board, dedicated spoon, things like that. Make sure the family members are healthy, nobody's immunocompromised and things like that. Like I said, I help people to the resources, and I have some on the website of just safe food handling. Yeah.
I have a dog that's turning 15. She's
Uh-huh.
3 pounds.
Uh-huh.
And she's never been eater.
Mm-hmm.
She seems a little thin and bony to me.
Uh-huh.
Should I let her? She wants to try to get her to eat.
So usually what we'll start with, and if you're here, you probably do routine health care. So first order of business is to make sure that veterinarian examines her, make sure that organ systems are all functioning well. And if that all checks out, actually our hospital director just asked me this about one of his patients, where I recommend is if you don't have to pigeonhole yourself because the organs are working well, heart's okay, I don't have to think about sodium or anything like that, look at how many calories are in what you're currently feeding and find a product that's higher. So some examples that I'll use for little tiny dogs, if I don't have to worry about any organ disease, sometimes the puppy formulation of a diet will be a little bit higher in calories because they're growing. Believe it or not, for some dogs, I'll have folks try kitten foods because, again, cats tend to eat a higher fat, more caloric dense diet. And then, of course, some of it's just looking to see, is it the issue that, she's able to chew okay, because we can play with kibble size or consistency and things like that.
Are there any, in the same way that you provided the research about the grain-free diet, are there any other types of food or ingredients that later down the line show like a almost like more cancer or any kind of like degenerative disease or anything like that?
Not to date. I get asked that question a lot. And what I would fall back on saying that the one thing that we do know for longevity is keeping them lean, because we know that extra body fat is actually metabolically active. It's making a lot of inflammatory mediators, and that's producing inflammation in the body. So we try to minimize that. I usually say to folks, I think a healthy diet. I think that idea of adding fresh fruits and vegetables for the thought that maybe there are these things called phytochemicals that might be beneficial. But we can't really look at any one ingredient and say ingredient X causes disease Y. That again becomes a lot of the scare tactics you see on the internet. And maybe someday we'll learn more, but we don't see those types of patterns. So it's just kind of thinking about healthy lifestyle, complete and balanced nutrients, lean body condition. But I don't give people a no list. And that's so anti how current marketing is, right? I don't give the no, your dog or cat can never have X, Y, or Z. Now, again, if your animal has diabetes, your cat, I am going to steer you as a human diabetic to thinking about the carbs. But we don't know that carbs in cats cause diabetes. In fact, what we know is obesity in cats is a risk factor. And when they really pieced together the study, it was the high-calorie foods, which tend to be high-fat, because fat has more calories than protein or carb, that were more likely associated with diabetes because it was associated with weight gain. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoops, microphone's here. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One is similar to an earlier question. I have two cats, one of whom is on a special diet for his bladder.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay for my other cat, who's perfectly healthy, to eat his food?
Was it a bladder stone? Do you remember what the issue was with the bladder?
Crystals.
Crystals. More likely than not, a couple things you can look at.
Oh, he had a blockage, actually.
A blockage, okay, okay. So I'm guessing, and you'll have to kind of fill this in, but I'll give you some things to look at. So most cats, if they get a male cat urethral obstruction, it tends to be struvite type of crystals. And they're usually put on a diet that just manipulates the urinary pH. And if you look at that label, see if that label has that nutritional adequacy statement on it, because some of them do, that will say complete and balanced for adults. So if your other cat is totally healthy and is not a kitten, because we don't usually feed those types of diets under a year of age, then most likely it's okay. If your other cat's fine, it's complete and balanced maintenance. So, always say to folks, where I really, shouldn't go is not looking at your pet's medical record, but a general rule of thumb is that, in contrast to, say, the kidney diets or some of the ultra-low-fat diets, that is probably okay for your other cat. And there's two ways to know. Number one, just ask your veterinarian, just call the hospital and ask. Secondly is look at that label, and you'll know if it says, that AFCO feeding statement, okay for adult maintenance of cats, probably going to be okay. Again, as long as that cat doesn't have heart disease, a heart murmur, kidney problem, anything like that.
Thank you. And then two other things real fast. Can we go back to the resources slide?
Yeah.
And
Just tell me
besides things like tuna fish, which can be really smelly, and there's a brand, I can't remember what it's called, but that has a strong smell. Is there ways? No, it was a list of it's either right before or after, I think.
So
right?
the big list is going to be on the website. That's a big list with hyperlinks.
No,
Yeah, I don't think I have one that shows all the websites. Oh, you want to see the Balance It site? Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, that was under Home Cook. Let me get you. Yeah. And that's actually on the resource list, too. Yes. That's the I want to cook for my pet, and I want some guidance from a veterinary nutritionist.
Oh, okay, remember now what it was.
Yeah. Two websites. One
That's
called
it. Yeah,
balanceit.com, second petdiets.com.
Thank you.
Nutritionist Sean Delaney, trained at Davis. Becky Rimmelard. Yeah, good.
Thank you. And then just the other question was about, is there a way to stimulate a cat's appetite?
Oh, yeah.
Besides, like,
Okay.
smelly foods like the tuna fish, or there's a brand, and I can't think of what it's called, but.
So, yeah, stimulating kitties to eat if they need to take in more calories. You hit a lot of them. Play with texture. Cats are very texture motivated. You'll sometimes find a certain kibble shape works better, and it's individual. and certain consistency. So one of my colleagues, her cat likes gravies. You know, you might find gravies. More and more, the therapeutic diets are starting to come in different forms like that than they were, say, even just 5 years ago. So some of it you can do in your own kitchen. If you know your animal likes gravy, put it in the blender, add a little bit of water to it, or broth, I warn people, because most have garlic or onion. You can find some that don't, but there's actually a product, I think it's still available, that a company makes called Fruitables, that's dog and cat broth, doesn't have sodium in it, doesn't have. You can try that. You can play with temperature, warm or cold. And when it's really bad, you talk to your veterinarian. There are some appetite stimulants. There's actually a new one on the market that's actually applied topically, so you don't have to pill, which no cat really likes. So you can talk to your vet about that.
Okay, we're going to take one last question right here.
And I'll hang out a little bit more.
Thank you.
I won't go anywhere.
Okay, all right. My dog Hudson here. So the issue is, I wanted to know, he has a problem with the right anal gland.
Yes.
He's 6 years old. He's
Okay.
had 2 impactions and 1 ruptured.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to know, nutrition-wise, what your recommendations are. Trying to avoid surgery, obviously.
right.
I don't want to go that route.
Yeah. There's a
so-
couple things we think about. One thing that we think about is fiber, and the concept behind fiber is those glands sometimes just need a little bit more push from the inside, just like when your vet goes and expresses them. So for some animals, a higher fiber diet will make a difference. So you could talk to your vet about,
Wheat bran, pumpkin, right?
those are the type, yep, either that you'll add to the food, or there are actually some diets that are made to be higher in fiber. So there's a couple of therapeutic diets that are made that way. Some of your weight loss diets are made that way. Labels don't have a lot of information on them, but if you look at labels, it will say something crude fiber minimum. And you can look at that. Now the caveat, and you'll see this on one of the resources, when you compare canned and dry foods, you can't use that number on the label. You have to do a little bit of math, and the website helps with that. Think fiber. Less likely, but still possible, not usually when it's just one side, is food sensitivities. So some people will have success if they try one of these hydrolyzed type diets or things like that. So kind of 2 things to think about. The challenge is if it's chronic infection and scar tissue, it's hard for diet to override that a bit.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Eirmann. Thank you all
Thank
for
you,
your
everybody.
questions.
Really appreciate it.